The wind cut through the trees like shards of broken glass, the kind of bitter cold that pierced through coats and gloves and seemed to bite straight into the bones. In the shadows of the city's wealthiest district, a park lay still under the heavy weight of winter. Street lights flickered dimly, casting halos of pale gold over empty benches and frosted paths. And there, curled into herself on the frozen ground, lay a girl. Her lips were blue, her breath shallow, her frame trembling against the merciless air. Passers-by glanced once, then away, their footsteps quickening, eyes lowered as though the sight of her suffering might infect them with guilt. No one stopped, no one. She was young, black, and poor, and in this place, where glass towers glittered with the warmth of lives lived in comfort, her presence seemed to the world like an intrusion rather than a plea for mercy. But then, a man's footsteps slowed. His tailored shoes crunched against the ice, pausing at the edge of the path. His coat was thick, his scarf knotted with precision, his presence marked by quiet authority. He had the kind of face the newspapers often printed. Strong, polished, and framed with a reputation built on billions. Richard Hawthorne, a name spoken with awe and envy, a man known as much for his empires as for the iron discipline that had carried him through storms most men could not endure. Yet as he looked down at the girl, something shifted in his chest. Her hand twitched weakly, fingers scratching at the frost, as if she were trying to claw her way back to warmth. The world around him seemed to vanish in that instant. The whispering trees, the glittering towers, even the faint hum of traffic far off. All that remained was her. A child of maybe 16, wrapped in a threadbare sweater far too thin to protect her from the punishing cold. Her shoes were soaked through, her skin pale, her hair tangled and stiff from wind. For a man who had stood on trading floors where millions shifted in the span of seconds, who had walked battlefields of corporate wars and emerged victorious, Richard felt something he had not in years: helplessness. He crouched, brushing snow from her face, his gloved hand trembling. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes clouded with exhaustion, but still carrying that stubborn spark of life. She tried to form words, but only a rasp escaped her cracked lips. Around them, people continued walking, some casting glances filled with disdain, others with discomfort, but not one stopped. Richard, the billionaire everyone assumed was too busy, too cold, too untouchable, stayed. In that moment, the divide between wealth and poverty, race and privilege vanished. There was only one human being holding on to another's fading strength. A memory struck him then, sharp and unrelenting. Another winter, decades earlier. He was a boy, huddled against his mother's side in the back of a shelter, the stench of damp wool and unwashed bodies thick in the air. His father had abandoned them. His mother had worked herself sick, and for nights on end, they'd had nothing but bread crusts to share. He remembered how she had whispered, one day, "Richard, you'll never feel this cold again, and when you see someone else freezing, you'll know what to do." His throat tightened as he lifted the girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. For the first time in years, Richard didn't care if he was late for a meeting, didn't care if headlines would mock him for being seen here, cradling a homeless black girl in a park. All he cared about was the pulse beneath her skin, faint but still there. He carried her toward his waiting car, a sleek machine parked at the edge of the street. His driver leapt out, startled at the sight. "Sir," the man began, but Richard silenced him with a look sharper than any command. The girl came first, always the girl. Wrapped now in blankets from the car, she stirred faintly, whispering words Richard strained to hear. Her voice was hoarse, broken, yet it cut him deeper than any insult ever could. Didn't think anyone would stop. Richard's chest constricted. In all his boardrooms, all his dealings, he had battled men who measured themselves in numbers. But this girl, this fragile life trembling in his arms, measured the world in mercy. And to her, mercy had been missing. The hospital lights were too harsh, too white. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses moved briskly. But Richard sat rooted in the chair by her bedside. Days passed, and still he waited. The girl, her name was Amara, he would soon learn, slept fitfully, nightmares flickering across her face. Her story emerged slowly, pieced together between shallow breaths and hesitant words. She had been living on the edge of survival for months, abandoned after her mother's death, shuffled through foster homes that cared more for government checks than for the fragile girl they were supposed to shelter. She had run, hoping to find safety, only to discover the streets were colder than any home she had ever known. Richard listened, every word carving itself into him. This was not just her story. It was the story of countless others, hidden beneath the glitter of the city he had built his empire upon. For all his success, he had never seen them, not truly. He had read reports, statistics, signed checks for charities. But statistics did not shiver, reports did not cry themselves to sleep. Only now, sitting at Amara's side, did he understand the depth of their suffering. When she finally opened her eyes fully, he saw not weakness but fire, a stubborn resilience that refused to be extinguished. And with that fire came a question, simple and devastating. "Why did you stop for me?" Richard's voice, usually so commanding, softened to a near whisper. "Because once, no one stopped for me." The words hung in the sterile air, a confession and a promise bound together. From that moment, everything changed. Richard poured his resources into her care, but not just hers. He began walking the streets he had once ignored, speaking with those who had been forgotten, listening to voices society had silenced. The world watched in shock as the billionaire, who had once been the face of ruthless ambition, now knelt beside shelters, handing out meals, asking names, remembering faces. Critics called it a stunt. Headlines sneered that it was all for image, but Richard knew the truth. His mother's whisper haunted him, and Amara's fragile voice echoed it. Someone had to stop. Amara recovered slowly, her body regaining strength, her spirit harder to mend. There were nights she still woke screaming, memories of cold and hunger clawing at her mind. But Richard was there, not as a savior, but as a witness, and sometimes the greatest gift was simply not looking away. The day Amara stood beside him at a press conference, her hand small but steady in his, the world fell silent. Cameras captured the image, but they could not capture the weight of it. The billionaire and the girl, both survivors of different kinds of winters, bound by a single act of compassion. And in that silence, Richard spoke words that would echo far beyond the room. "True wealth is not measured by what we keep, but by what we give. Dignity is not earned in boardrooms, but in how we treat the forgotten. I stopped because someone once told me never to forget the cold, and I will not forget again." The crowd rose, not in applause but in quiet respect. For once, silence was not neglect. It was reverence. Amara looked up at him, eyes glistening, and for the first time in years, Richard felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had fought many battles, but this victory was different. It was not over profit or prestige. It was over humanity. He was over humanity. And as they left the stage together, hand in hand, the city seemed a little warmer. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world is stopping for the one person everyone else walks past. And Richard Hawthorne, the billionaire once too busy to notice, had learned the most enduring truth of all: silent strength, silent dignity, silent acts of mercy. These are the things that outlast empires.